Welcome to our webinar, Navigate Workplace Conflict, Have More Influence, Less Drama, and Better Collaboration with Karin Hurt. Thank you so much for joining us today. If there are any scheduling conflicts that have come up for you this morning, not to worry. We'll be sending a recording of this webinar out, and you can always find it on our website under the On the Airwaves section, along with a lot of great resources, videos, and past webinars. My name is Claudia. I am the marketing manager here at the Roundtable, and I'm happy to share with you that I'm super excited because this is my very first time hosting an Ask the Expert webinar. So we at the Roundtable are committed to making an impact as part of our own commitment to ongoing reconciliation. In January 2022, we partner with Inspire. Inspire is a national Indigenous registered charity that invests in the education of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people for the long-term benefit of these individuals, their families and communities, and of course, Canada. The awful discovery of 215 Indigenous children buried in unmarked graves in Kamloops, British Columbia in 2021 deeply affected us. To honor the legacy of the Kamloops 215, we are striving to provide 215 university scholarships over the next 5 years. If you would like to learn more or make a donation to help us achieve our goal, please reach out to me at the email you're seeing on screen. And as we approach the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation on September 30th, we want to reaffirm our dedication to supporting Indigenous communities. This day is a call to reflect, learn, and engage in meaningful actions towards reconciliation. And of course, one of these actions is to acknowledge the land we reside on, as it recognizes the connection Indigenous peoples have with their territories and shows respect for their history and culture. I will now say the land acknowledgement for where I am residing, and I respectfully acknowledge that in Toronto, we are the traditional territory for many nations, including the Mississaugas of Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Toronto is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Now, before we start, just a few housekeeping items. We are recording today's webinar, so you'll receive an email with the link to the recording. And we'll also release a summary blog post that we encourage you to check out on our website under the resources section. I'm dropping the link in the chat right now. And with that, I want to officially open the chat and hear from you. Feel free to introduce yourself, tell us where you work at, what brought you here, where do you come from. I'm sure we have many interesting people joining us today, and they are likely to become valuable connections in your network. So don't be shy to add your thoughts there. We'll love an interactive crowd. Also during the session, we encourage you to share your thoughts and comments in the chat. Maybe something that resonates with you or some story worth sharing. And finally, of course, the question and answers will be open, and I'll be monitoring that. So feel free to add your questions in the Q&A at any time. No need to wait until the end of the session. Questions can be asked at any time, so keep questions coming. For those who are new to us, we are the Roundtable. We are a company that helps leaders navigate change, disruption, and growth by building the mindsets and behavior that matter the most. And now I'd like to introduce Glain Roberts-McCabe. Glain is the founder and president of the Roundtable. Glain is a certified executive coach and has over 30 years of experience leading teams in private, public, and not-for-profit sectors. Glain is the creator of several multi-award winning group coaching programs, including the Roundtable for Leaders, the Roundtable Catalyst, and the Roundtable High Performance Team Coach. And she's the author of 2 best-selling books, The Grassroots Leadership Revolution, and Did I Really Sign Up for This? Glain, over to you.
Thank you, Claudia, and round of applause for Claudia for doing her very first intro of a webinar. Yay, you did it. Good job. Well, welcome everyone. So for those of you that are maybe a bit new to us, I will quickly give you kind of the 411 on what we do. So we often get people calling us and saying, do you do leadership training? Do you do leadership coaching? And we just know that's a bit of a shallow conversation. Usually as we're digging deeper, we find out that what people are actually looking for is exceptional leadership, they're looking for exceptional teams, and they're looking for exceptional culture. And so, but you know what, we like to go even deeper than that, because you know what we've found over the years, and you know, I've been leading teams since I was 24 years old, so I'm getting pretty up there, is that we got to kick the concept of heroic leadership to the curb. And it's really about this idea of moving beyond ego, embracing vulnerability, connecting to each other's strengths, and being able to unleash collective impact as organizations, as leaders. So that's what we've actually developed is a system. Over 17 years, we've developed a system, and we can help you get there. So if you would like more information on that, you can shoot us an email. And in layman's terms, you know, we do one-to-one coaching, we do team coaching, and we do group coaching programs. So reach out to us more if you want more info. But star of the show, I am super excited to welcome my friend Karin Hurt, who is the CEO of Let's Grow Leaders. Karin and I met through an association for learning providers. This is where all of us learning providers go together in a peer community and support each other and guide each other. Karin has written 5 award-winning books, and we are here to really dive into her latest book, Powerful Phrases for Dealing with Workplace Conflicts. So super excited, Karin, to have you here with us today. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, absolutely. My pleasure. I'm looking forward to it.
Excellent. Well, you know what, we're going to kind of dive right in because you've written 5 books. So my question for you is, what made you write this one? What was the kind of reason that you decided, yes, I'm going to write another book? I've written 2. They're painful. So tell me about it.
This one was really interesting, Glain, because our publisher came to us and said, we think there is a problem. We see that conflict is getting worse since the pandemic.
True.
And a lot of the books that have been written recently around conflict aren't taking into all the new scenarios that are happening. Now, so we write this book and we're like, well, all of our other books are research-based, right? So how do we know conflict is getting worse? And so we said, hold on, let us do some research for a moment. So we did the World Workplace Conflict and Collaboration Survey, which was in 46 countries, 5,000 participants, to ask a couple of questions. Is conflict actually getting worse? And spoiler alert, it is. And there's what we're calling a new breed of conflict, new conflict cocktails. So, you know, it's more complex. So people are dealing with personal mental health challenges, exhaustion from post-pandemic stress. They are now some are working from home and feeling isolated or trying to navigate more global organizations because a lot of the staffing happened more globally when everyone was working from home, and dealing with multiple time zones, matrix teams, all of that has intensified. And so what we wrote the book, once we understood what was actually going on, to get super, super practical, you know, not a lot of theory, but all right, if you're faced with this conflict, what do you do?
Yeah. And I love it. And everybody on the call, you know how I love practical. This book is probably one of the most practical books on conflict I've ever read. So let's unpack this C word a little bit before we kind of dive into some of the models and things. Conflict is such a triggering word for so many people. So what do you think makes it so challenging for us in general, and then in the workplace specifically?
Yeah, I think when people think of conflict, we tend to go, oh, I don't want that. Right?
Yeah.
Because conflict feels scary. It feels like a clash.
Yeah.
But really, if you are doing teams right, and you know this, you do this all the time.
Yeah.
On the other side of collaborative conflict, good conflict is where your innovation comes from.
100%.
So when I think about conflict, I think I have an opinion, I have an approach, you have an opinion, you have an approach, and they're not immediately aligned.
Yeah.
And so if you can bring those conversations and teach people how to have that and not avoid the conversation, because the biggest mistake we see people making is they are backing away from the conversation and they don't have it. I had a friend who said, she's on my book and she at my house and she goes, oh, thank God I work in an organization that doesn't have any conflict. And I said, oh no, that's not good. Yeah, because you want that. I mean, my husband is my co-author, and we have conflict all day long.
Yeah.
And we still go to bed together at night, right? And so,
Yeah.
the thing, because I am a big vision, move fast, he's operations, and in that is going to be conflict. But if you can harness that, you are going to produce better results.
Yeah, I love that. And that was what struck me in the book, actually. I thought to myself, conflict really is in the eye of the beholder. What
Yeah.
I perceive as conflict, you may not, and vice versa. And I think one of the things that you've done in the book is you sort of identified these 4 conflict dimensions that sort of give us a landing map to start on. So why don't you kind of give us a quick overview of these dimensions that you came
Yeah.
up with?
Perfect. So we talk about 4 dimensions of productive conflict.
Mm.
Another word for productive conflict, collaboration. So connection. Are we genuinely connected as human beings? And this happens at 2 levels. If you are connected at a human level, you are more likely, before you need to have a conversation. If I trust you and you come to me and something feels like conflict, I say, well, but I've known Glenn for a minute, and she's a really nice person who seems to have my best interest at heart. I am going to engage in this conversation more easily.
Yeah.
But, if you threw me under the bus the other day and told my boss what a terrible person I am, right? Well, now I have zero connection with you.
Yeah.
And no matter what you say, no matter what powerful phrase you use, I am not going to trust you. So that's connection before you need it. But it's also connection in the conversation.
Mm.
And really starting the conversation at a human level. Like one of my favorite, we call this our goats, and we'll get into the goats, but
Yeah, I
greatest of all
love the
time,
goat.
powerful phrases. But one of my favorite connection goats is, I really care about, and then you insert the thing that you genuinely care about. So I really care about you. I care about our friendship. I care about our relationship.
Mm.
I care about, now, if that's going too far, say, I really care about this project. I really care about our customers. I really care about this outcome.
Yeah.
And then, and I am confident we can find a solution we can work with here. So
Mm.
that's connection.
Yeah.
The next dimension is clarity. And do we have a shared understanding of success?
Mhm.
And this is at 2 levels also, right? So what does success look like? Said every good team ever, right? You're aligned on what your most important things are. The goat that I like for this one is, what would a successful outcome do for you? Now we're
Mm.
going a level deeper to motivation. So we
Mm.
both know what the project's supposed to look like. But if
Mm.
we sit down and we ask each other this question, what would a successful outcome do for you? And I might say to you, Glenn, I got to tell you, I have been on the road. And here's the thing, if I can be home by 5 o'clock on Friday because I really, really want to catch my kid's game, and you go, all right, so we're going to have to work efficiently, is what you're saying. I'm like, right. And I said, what does this successful outcome do for you? And you say, I have really been trying to get my boss's attention about how critical a thinker I am on this topic. Can I have the
Mm.
microphone when we're doing the presentation, at least part of the time? Well, what would success look like? We would have just talked about the outcome. But if we can make that invisible conversation possible, then we're already collaborating.
Okay,
So,
I love this. Okay, so I'm going to pause. We'll get to the next 2, but I love, okay, the 2 things you said. So for those that were on the call with Michael Bungay-Stanier and I talking about his new book about how to work with almost anyone, one of the things he really talks about is connection first, right? And in organizations, the challenge, I think, that tees up potential conflict is we go right into work. Like when you see cross-functional problems or team problems, at the roundtable, we have a concept of connection before content. And that's really what you're talking about here. It's like, create the connection with people, build those emotional piggy banks, have that strong foundation to be able to work from in order to even head conflict off at the pass. And then this sort of concept here that I really also sort of love, this idea of, that we have to think really about each other's motivations, because we tend to have an assumption that we're all clear on what the end game is and why we're in this thing together, right?
Yeah.
And that's where conflict. So I love these are really preemptive strategies for those of us that like avoiding conflict, looking in the mirror here at myself. keep us kind of going on the right track. Love it. Okay, keep going. Give us the next
Yeah.
three or
So
four.
one more thing about clarity is most conflict comes from an expectation of violation of some sort.
100%.
Yeah.
Oh my
And
gosh.
so we say one good conversation about expectations prevents 14 why didn't you conversations. No, and I'm about to go work with an executive team and who is coming together, but there's some conflict going on. And so, we're starting with clarity, right? Like what
Yeah.
really is the most important thing here? What is getting in the way of the most important thing?
Yeah.
And so that they can immediately, once you get that clear, everything else really falls into place, assuming you have the connection. So connection, clarity, curiosity. And this is, are we genuinely interested in one another's perspectives and what is possible, like alternative ways of doing things? So, if we can show up and just be really curious, even you're in a conflict and you say, wow, what does this look like from your perspective? Just that is a curiosity question. And if you stop and really listen, and sometimes people say, well, what if I ask, what does it look like from your perspective? And then they don't ask me. Well, then you can still tell them. You're going to say, thank you for sharing. Now let me share out what this looks like from my perspective, right?
Sometimes
So
you got to
that's
role model the
curiosity.
way, right? You got to role model the way.
Yeah. So connection, clarity, curiosity. And the final one is commitment. And this is the one that we found in our research that a lot of people are missing. So even when they have the courage to have the conversation, they don't do what we call schedule to finish about what does the shared agreement look like. So say we are having a conflict and we agree on a couple of behaviors that we're going to do to really make our collaboration better. And we say, great, I'm so glad we had this conversation. And then 3 weeks from now, I'm back to my old stunts and you're doing the thing that's ticking me off. And we haven't scheduled time to talk about it. But instead of we could say, okay, so we've agreed on I'm going to do this and you're going to do that. Do I have that right? So you're checking for understanding of because when we're fired up, sometimes we hear things that weren't actually said.
Yeah.
And then from there, we say, okay, so let's meet again. Let's see, it's September 18th. Why don't we meet again on in 2 weeks? Let's put the date on the calendar right now, and we'll see how this is going. Now, the thing is, we're both looking at that calendar and we go, oh, I'm going to have that conversation again. I am more likely to pay attention to my commitments. But here's the most important part of that. If one of us or the other of us does not meet the commitment, the other person does not have to summon the courage to have the conversation again because we've already scheduled it. It's already on the calendar. And if we do get better, we don't get moving so fast that we forget to celebrate and thank one another for doing what we said we were going to do. So that's commitment. And that commitment will prevent those Groundhog Day conflicts that keep popping up again and again and again.
Yeah, I love it. These, as you talk them through, I mean, these 4 elements really can work in a system, right? Like if you think about where relationships go, and it's almost like a framework to see, have I got all these pieces in place?
That is exactly how. So you think, all right, so you're in a conflict, and then you can say, okay, what is going on here?
Yeah.
Are we
what's the gap?
connected? Have we forgotten to be curious? Do we have clarity? Do we have a shared understanding what success looks like? Or are we not holding one another accountable to what we said we do? And that shows you where to go. And that's really how we wrote the book. So you go, which dimensions at play here? And then you can go into the actual ACE, acute conflict emergency, and it'll give you some powerful phrases. The other thing that we have done is broken these down into specific habits. And so we have our Synergy Stack team development system, which for each one of those dimensions has 12 habits, very practical things that you can do. So you can go into your team and say, well, all right, so we need to be working on curiosity. That seems really broad to most people. What does it mean? But now, all right, well, really tactically, practically, what do we mean by curious? And you don't need to use our habit cards. You can take index cards and say, what are the behaviors for curiosity that matter here? But just, to getting it down to a habit level, a behavior level. When I think about behaviors, I think if I took out my phone and observed and recorded and played it back, how would I describe what I'm looking for there? That's, something you can actually see.
Yeah. I love it. And those that have been through our programs know how much we love a good behavioral cue. You know, what you say and do makes the difference. So you created this cute little acronym, the GOATs, the greatest of all time powerful phrases. And you've given us a couple already, but tell us a couple of your favorite GOATs.
Yeah, so in the resource, there's going to be a link to a free resource center, and in there, there's a collaborative conversations guide that is totally free that goes with the book, and it's got activities and job aids. One of them is a one pager with these 12 goats, and the other is make your own goat. So it's like a cute little template with all these very cute little AI generated goats that I made, and then you can make your own goat. What is your greatest of all time powerful phrase? So as I'm talking, I'd love for people to chat in. What are some of their greatest of all time powerful phrases for these dimensions? So so when you think about connection, the first one there is really my favorite, the one that I already shared.
Yeah.
And another one is connected. How does this look like? Like what is your, connecting just at a human level? And so when you think about some of the goats, and I want to show you what these look like here, because just so you get a sense, but they look like these. So goats, tell me more is one of my favorite goats. Tell me more. So somebody comes to you and they are fired up and they're escalated. And you go, oh my gosh, sounds like you're really upset. Can you tell me more? Right now, immediately, the reason people get louder is because they don't think they've been heard, and louder metaphorically or for real, right? And so if you just calmly say, tell me more, now you have created a human connection. So that's one of my favorites. Let's see, let's give some other ones here. So clarity, let's start with what we agree on. And so this is a really good one here, because if you are over here and I am over here, and then I say, let's start with what we agree on here. Now we're not having a conflict about 27 things. Maybe we're having a difficult conversation about 2 or 3 things. It is going to save you an enormous amount of time. So, and then if you go take a look at some of these other curiosity goats, we've got, what do you suggest we do next?
I love that one, because I think, what I love about this, Karin, and just to kind of connect the dots for, some of the folks that, on our call and do the work with us, we talk a lot about our strengths as leaders, right? Like we talk a lot about our strengths, and that the biggest challenge for us as leaders is not actually working with your strengths. It's managing the dark side of your strength. Right. And I think one of the things, and I'll speak for myself, I am a problem solver. I love a good problem. I love unleashing my creative capability on a problem. And so, the question that you have there around what do you suggest we do next is actually not one that would occur to me to ask, because it's not really in my repertoire. So if it's a situation where really the person is feeling at odds with me, and they're kind of bringing up the situation, instead I'm jumping into my problem solving mode, thinking I'm being so helpful, could potentially be building conflict right within the individual. So I think one of the things too, which just struck me about the goats, is there's just a great way for people to start to look to go, is that my default response or not? Because if it's not my default response, there's probably something about the way I tend to like to operate that is encounter to that, right? That maybe is tied to a strength of mine that I'm bringing to the table as a leader. Because I genuinely don't feel, most of the, everybody on the call is sort of in a leadership role of some kind, that we intentionally go to create conflict in our teams, but sometimes we unintentionally create conflict. Right. These little
and you know what? And a lot of conflict comes from, some of the biggest conflict in teams were the ones where we all cared so much. Yeah. And I think back, so that's where a lot of conflict comes from. The other thing that I would say is to look at your systems and processes. When I think about, and so Ralph Kilman, I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but he did the TKI, the Kilman assessment. Yeah. And I asked him if I could call him this, and he said yes. He, the grandfather of conflict research. But his whole point is, we can teach people to navigate conflict and do conflict styles, but if our organizations are set up in a way that is going to create inherent conflict, you are swimming upstream trying to teach and
100%.
wasting time and money teaching people how to collaborate. If by nature, we're competing against each other in a stack rank or, so I remember I worked for Verizon for 20 years and I ran the store channel and there was an indirect store channel and we shared a parking lot with these two stores and our quotas were competing against each other, right?
Mhm.
Like we're going to have
Yeah.
conflict. I mean, I'm a
Yeah.
nice person. We had conflict. I had
Yeah.
conflict at that store.
100%. No, it's
Yeah.
so true. Like in Ruth Wegeman, who's one of the team coaching research gurus. I mean, what she found was that 70% of problems within teams are related to structure, right? So
Yes.
you can think it's about the people, but it's not. If you've got the wrong structure, the wrong compensation systems, reward systems, you got to deal with all of that before you can start now going, okay, let's create psychological safety. Like
Yeah.
it's just not going to get
I
you
know
there.
my boss is like, well, just come sing karaoke together. I'm like,
Oh
that's
my
not gonna.
gosh. Yeah. Let's have a pizza party. Yeah. So, okay, let's talk about some of the typical conflicts that we see in organizations. And folks, feel free to start throwing your questions in there now. You got some specific,
Or if you've got goats, I'd love to
scenarios.
hear some of your goats in the
Yeah,
chat
Karen's a
too.
goat collector. So if you've got some phrases that work for you, give Karen some new goats. Okay, so I know one of the hot button topics that comes up a lot in our programs is because we work a lot with the high performing leaders in the middle of the organization.
Okay.
And when you're busy, who do you give your work to? You give it to the high performer, right? And so one of the challenges that folks in this, certainly a lot of our groups seem to bring to the table is around putting up boundaries and saying no to their boss. And so what are some of maybe your goats that you could share and strategies to share around saying no to that person who's in the power seat?
Yeah, so it's so interesting that you chose this one as the first one, because when people call us and say, "Can you come do a workshop for my team on this stuff?" The number one scenario they want to work on is this: how do you say
Interesting.
no? How do I say no, particularly to my boss, without damaging my career? Right.
100%.
So the first thing is the way we like to frame this is you want to say every time you're saying yes to something, you're inherently saying no to something else.
Yeah.
And so how do you say yes to say no? So, imagine, so if you say yes to your boss, sure, I'll work all weekend. Then you're saying no potentially to your commitment to your children or to something that you've committed to do in a volunteer. And that over time is going to create more conflict down the road somewhere else. So to really focus on what do I really want to say yes to, being very, very clear on what we call your MITs, your most important things, and aligning those with your boss.
Mm.
So if your boss comes to you and says, hey, I have this special project for you. And Glenn, I have got to tell you, this is going to be fantastic for your career. It's going to give you exposure to several senior vice presidents. This is like box 9 succession planning stuff. You should do this project.
I'm in, Karen, I'm in. And then I talk to my
Right?
husband
But
and
then
say,
you're
I'm
really
overloaded.
thinking about, yeah, but I am not going to succeed in my day job, right? Like we are going to
100%.
lose 3 I could do that for sure, but you're also going to not have me in box 9 succession planning if we lose our 3 major clients, because I'm in the neck deep already with this.
Yeah.
So you say yes first to your boss. You say yes to the idea.
Mm.
Thank you so much for consistently caring about me and my career. I cannot tell you how much that means to me. And I completely agree. This would give me exposure to exactly the kind of critical thinking and the people. And so I want to do something like this. And I have to tell you, here's what's on my plate right now. And here are the implications for our organization if I were to take my eyes off the ball on this. So I'd love to talk about this together. Like, what do you think? Which of these do you think is most important? And what do you suggest we do so that I can, if I were to take on this project, what could come off my plate? Or if I actually, maybe you're saying, I feel like I'm really digging this and I want to see these things through. Do you think we could look for a project similar to this at a different time? You know, so you are saying yes to the idea. David and I are, so I do like the CEO, CMO role. He does like the COO role, president role. And as we do that, I am the idea person and I am constantly coming with new ideas. And what we had a lot of conflict early on because he was like, we can't possibly do that. Yeah, like no, like absolutely not. We cannot do that. But now he's learned to say yes to the idea. So I mean, I'm not his boss, but in this scenario, the roles are similar to that, right?
For sure.
So you know, he'll say, "Oh my gosh, Karin, that is a fantastic idea. I can really see why you think that would make strategic sense for our business." And then he says this, "Let me tell you what it would take to operationalize that right now. And what is at stake if I pull the resources off of what's happening here over to do this thing? Is that a choice you want to make?" I always say no. Right. But I don't feel ticked off.
Right. But that's the difference, right?
Right.
Because like, I think, you know, and I think you and I are similar that way. And I think I'm an idea person. And so, and the challenge with me is though I'm also fairly competitive. And so what'll kick in when you push back on an idea without agreeing with my idea first is my winning drive kicks in. And I want to prove to you how you're
Right.
wrong and I'm right. It's terrible. Like you know, I need to, you know, it's a constant thing I'm working on. However, when you do it that way, what that does for a leader who is a very fast thinker, potentially really innovative, coming up with all ideas, is you're forcing them to slow down and think strategically. And
Yes.
and without losing face, right? To some degree.
Right.
So you're allowing them to do that. I think the other thing that also comes to mind for me too, though, is that, you know, especially if in an organization that's very fast moving, the opportunity, like we've aligned on those goals, this is really important. Now this project comes up and we're revisiting it, is that maybe the things that you thought were really critical to your boss are now less critical. And in fact, this is more critical and it is going to be okay for you to let go of it. And you don't have to try and manage both. Right. But I
Yes.
think, and because sometimes I think bosses make the assumption that you're reprioritizing accordingly. And that's not what happens, right? Especially with, you know, those of us who are like to excel and achieve. And when I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do something, it's very hard to back off of a commitment. So,
Yes.
you know, I think it's a very interesting, you know, chance to kind of re-examine the assumptions that maybe we're making around what we think our boss
I
wants.
think that is the most important thing. You know, because every organization is moving fast pretty much right now,
Yeah.
right? And the more layers that there are, it is
Yeah.
easy for, you know, and you've got your head down and you're doing your things, but meanwhile things have shifted. And the most frustrating thing could be is if you have really nailed this thing and then you go to your performance review and they're like, yeah, but this other thing you didn't touch at all. And you're like, yeah, well, I was going to do that after I got through this. And
Yeah.
they're like, oh, that was the most important thing.
Yeah.
The day we had a situation where the very, very senior person gathered his team together, had a huddle at 8 a.m. on Monday morning. He had been dealing with it all weekend, but he didn't want to screw up his team over the weekend. So he waited till 8 a.m., but he got them together and he said, this is absolutely the most important thing. For the next 4 hours, I need none of you doing anything but this. And then he couldn't have been more clear.
Yeah.
And then he got to the end of the 4 hours and some of the stuff wasn't done. And people like, well, I got this really important call from this other department and from this other senior person and this other senior person. And so even when you think you're perfectly clear, like you have to be even more clear. Like, even if you get a call from the CEO, this is the most important thing, right? And so I think that clarity is so critical.
Yeah, it's hugely critical. So, so folks, you got scenarios, conflict scenarios, and we got Karin here. Here's a chance to get some advice. I got one that, like, when we were doing the pre-call, and I found this fascinating, and I have to say I've been thinking about it ever since. Something came up yesterday that made me go, ooh. You were sharing with me that when you taught an MBA class, one of the most common conflicts that occurred was with bosses stealing credit for people's work. And I found that fascinating and then also worrying because I thought, oh my God, am I a credit stealer for my team? I hope I'm not. So what did you learn from this group and what can you do if your boss is stealing credit for your work?
You know, so this is interesting. So our book before this was called Courageous Cultures, which is all about speaking up and sharing your ideas and how do you create an environment of psychological safety for that. And in that research, 56% of people said the reason they wouldn't share an idea is that they wouldn't get credit. That was like mind-boggling to me.
Wow.
But it was also consistent with this MBA class. So this is a class that was called Dealing with Difficult People at Work. It was an elective. So, and you came to work, you came to the class and you had to bring one difficult person. You were going to work on this difficult person through the entire semester. And almost every single person picked their boss. And the number one issue was that my boss is stealing credit for the work. And so
Wow.
we worked on how do they have these conversations? They had to go have the conversations. They had to talk about the outcomes. And what most of them found was their boss was completely blindsided by the fact that they had been perceived that way. Like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, I am so sorry.
Yeah.
You're right. I could see how it could feel that way from your perspective.
Yeah.
Right? Because they're moving fast, maybe they're the ones delivering the presentation, they forget to give the credit, but they did not like, I'm going to really, really screw up this person's career and take all the credit for the work. I mean, there's a few psychopaths in the world,
Sure.
but generally that's not what was going on. And what was on the other side of those conversations for people was relief. Just
Yeah.
relief that they had had the conversation. So what you're looking for there is to gently bring it up. Say, hey, I've noticed, right? What did you notice? I noticed that when you did this presentation to the board or to the executive team, you didn't mention my role. And I've got to tell you, it is really important for me. I'm really trying to build my brand, that I am an expert in this. I've spent a lot of time working on this project. And I'm curious, what was going on there. And they're like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I should have done that. You're right. Okay. So now what's your ask? Is there a way to make it right for this project? Is there a way to make it right for the next project? And ask for what you want. Do you think maybe next time I could come with you and be part of the presentation so people can have see my involvement? Or do you think maybe you could follow up in the meeting next time that this topic comes up and you don't have to say I screwed up. Just say, hey, I just want to make sure everyone is aware of Karin's role in this project. And so ask for
Mhm.
what you need.
Yeah, I love that. And I think the thing too that I think about as leaders, right? Like, in our programs, we're always telling people it starts with self-insight. Like you have to, like the biggest job you can do is on yourself to understand yourself and understand your triggers. And I can remember very clearly when I first had my very first direct report at 24, and I'd been used to getting all the accolades, right? I was a little superstar. I was always like that little gold star person. And all of a sudden, I had this really hypo direct report who suddenly started getting a lot of the accolades. And I realized I personally, on a motivational level, have a very high need for recognition and appreciation. Those of you who read the Love Languages book, that's my love. Like, I need to feel appreciated or I get a little cranky, right? And so I started noticing that within myself, right? That I was feeling kind of almost jealous about this direct report I had. And I really had to realign what was success for me. And I had to actually create recognition for myself that maybe looked a little different than it had when I was an individual contributor. So I had to kind of create a thing, say, you know what success for me is going to look like when everybody wants to poach my person because she's so good, or everybody wants to join my department because I'm such a good manager. And I think one of the things, the more you kind of know, because not everybody needs recognition, not everybody's, that's another opportunity for people in another way. But I think if you know that one of your things is needing that status, needing that recognition, how do you make sure that you shine the light bright enough on those around you? Because your own motivational energy for wanting that might actually be causing the problem, not intentionally, but on a bias level, it's tough to let that go. So I love that. I love that conversation. I think making people aware and also letting people know the type of recognition you need is so important, and the acknowledgement you need is so important, right?
I mean, that what you just said there is like gold. I like want to cut that out of the video and like blast it all over the internet because I mean, that is so true, right? Like, I say be the leader you want your boss to be, right?
Yeah.
And so if you want your boss to give you recognition, stop and ask yourself, am I properly acknowledging other people? And sometimes the people who don't really appear to need a lot of recognition still need to say say thank you. You need to still say thank you.
Yeah.
One of the we do this thing about things your top performers want to hear you say. And it's just based on, 13 years of hearing top performers complain about their bosses and what their boss isn't saying. And the number one thing is, I just wish my boss would say, wow, thank you.
Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah.
thanks.
Yeah. There's a great question that came in the chat actually, which is like, what about the opposite of bosses taking credit? What do you do when a boss blames their staff for their mistakes?
Oh, wow. Yeah. So again, I think you're noticing, and say, hey, I know you didn't mean to do this, right? But I noticed that you put the blame here, and I wouldn't use the word blame, right? I noticed that you said that the reason this project was 3 weeks behind was because of this.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, maybe you don't have all the information in here, but I want you to understand why this project is actually 3 weeks behind. It's 3 weeks behind because of X, Y, and Z. And I'm curious how we can, going forward, work so we're focusing more on the solutions than on pointing fingers at one another. And I think you've got to be careful when it's your boss, right? You're never, and I would avoid using trigger words. Like, you never want to tell your boss they're a micromanager. You never, right? I mean, because nobody thinks they're a micromanager.
Yeah.
And there's a chapter in the book about micromanagement, and it starts like this. Are you sure they're a micromanager? Because I hear both sides of that story too. So the employee will come to me and say, oh my gosh, my boss is a micromanager. He's always in my stuff. And then I go to the boss and coach in there, and like, it's so ridiculous. I have to micromanage this guy because he's not doing his work, right? And so so there's two sides to every one of these perspectives, right?
And that is a tough one, and I think again, like we think a lot about, for leaders to evolve, you've got to move beyond blame. But it's a human condition. We all blame. So sometimes you need to vent out the blame, get it out of your system. And then, the question I always bring our clients back to is, okay, so what part of this do you own? Right?
Yeah.
What part of this do I own? And just sit with that, right? And often I found when I have asked myself that question, I own about 90% of it, maybe 99.9% of it, because there's things that I shoulda, coulda, woulda done that I didn't. And that's why my team has struggled, or that's why that person, that project went sideways. I didn't get involved when I should have. I didn't do this, I didn't that. So what's the lesson from that, and how do you move forward with it?
Yeah,
Right?
Glenn, I think that's the whole thing. It's not that you don't want to understand where it went sideways, because you do need to go where it's sideways. And
Yeah.
I mean, I just did this last night. I said, but I said it bad because I was tired and traveling.
Yeah. It's easy to do this stuff when we're feeling good, right?
And so, I just said it privately to my partner, right? But I said, whose fault is this? Right. And I mean, that is such a bad question. But what but it was only to him, and it was fine. Right. But I would never, should never say that to somebody else.
Yeah.
Right. But what I really meant was, where did this process break down?
Yeah.
Because the consequences could have been severe.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And so let's make sure, or how can we be sure that what can we learn from this? How can we be sure this never happens again? Are way better questions than whose fault.
Yeah. Who did this? Okay, so one of the things, so to kind of maybe bring it up a level from sort of individual things, but one of the things our mutual friendly Aunt Davy, is also a big conflict person.
Yes.
And one of the things that she really talks about, and I've certainly experienced it multiple times in my career, is the tensions that occur between departments. You mentioned, when you worked at Verizon and you had the tensions between the other team, and it's so natural because there's going to be different agendas. I was in sales for years, and let me tell you, we always had tension between the finance department, who needed us to stay on the rate card when we wanted to go off the rate card and close the sale. So, you're going to have those natural tensions. So what what mistakes do you see people make when it comes to this sort of cross-functional work, and what can we do a little bit better to kind of avoid tensions bubbling in the wrong direction.
Yeah, so I would start with, I would pull in all 4 dimensions here. So,
Right.
and I am such a big fan of Leanne's work. She
Yes,
is
it's fantastic.
amazing, and she's actually one of the expert insights in our book. So,
Excellent.
she gives her perspective on bullying, which is fantastic. So, what I would start with connection. Like a lot of times there is conflict between departments because we don't actually know each other, and so the they is such a capital T. And, Brene Brown says it's hard to hate people up close. Well, this is true, right? And so the
Yeah.
first thing I would start is there a way you can get to know each other? What are their most important things? Like, what does success look like for them? What are the pressures that they're under? What is, what's stressing them out? Because I think if you can get that connection at a human level, it will make everything easier. And
Mhm.
then then I would go to the clarity and I would do the GOAT there. Like, what would a successful outcome do for you? And you get into that underlying motivations there, and then showing up really curious. And then I think, around clarity, one of the biggest, most important clarity things is who owns the decision. So, we're going to try to collaborate through this thing, but at the end of the day, we're out of time. Somebody gets to make the call. Who owns the decision?
Yeah.
And where a lot of conflict can come from is, I think we're going to go to consensus on this thing, and then somebody comes over the top, or we escalate it up to the boss, and some boss owns a decision. If we know how we're going to make the decision, if we're going to collaborate, how do we decide when we're going to escalate? We're going to have that conversation before we're actually in the conflict. Like, we're going to debate this, but if it's over X amount of dollars of a decision or whatever, get the parameters, we're going to escalate.
Mhm.
And so I think that's the next one. And then curiosity. What would a successful outcome do? Like, what is happening here? What does this look like from your perspectives? What do you suggest we do next? Some of those goats can really make a difference there.
Mhm.
And then commitment. And what are you going to do? How are you going to check for understanding with one another? So what I hear you saying is this: scheduling the finish, which we talked about, finding a time to talk about it again. But then what are we going to do how will we hold one another accountable? And are we going to have those conversations? Is that okay to do? And then
Mhm.
another thing that I would see in terms of another place I see a lot of conflict is we haven't reached clarity around some of the ways that we're going to work together. Who really needs to be in this meeting?
Yeah.
How are we going to communicate? And so we have conflict because all of a sudden you're Slack messaging me all this stuff, and I'm thinking this warrants a formalized email with key bullet points so that I can easily communicate this to my boss. And I'm like ticked off because now I gotta look at the Slack message thing and just make sense of it and put it into ChatGPT and figure out what the summaries are, right? And so all of that is expectation violations of how we're going to
Yeah.
work together.
Yeah.
So, but I think it really comes down to, do we have this agreement of what success looks like is
Yeah.
really the most important thing across these departments.
I love it. And so there's a couple more questions that have come into the chat. So one of them, just to build off of the team, we'll keep with the team theme and just say, go with this one. So question is, how do you encourage healthy conflict when you're with teams that either don't know or trust each other, or who are naturally very shy and quiet? Is there a way to make things fun or rewarding for people to engage? What would be your tips there to kind of get maybe two, almost sounds like
So
maybe more introverted groups together?
Yeah, so that the first thing that I would do is I would talk about collaboration and conflict in the abstract first. So versus talking about this team, especially if the team is already feeling, or they don't know each other, or they're already feeling some tensions. So, hey, tell me about it. You don't have to we're having a team building, but hey, I'm really curious. Tell me about a team that you worked on that was just great. Like, they were successful. You loved coming to work. What did that look like? Everyone loves to talk about their happy teams,
Yeah.
right? But the idea is not to just say everybody was really nice, right? Like, get down to a behavioral level, and you have a conversation around that. And they're like, okay, so what are 2 things that if we did on this team that would make it more like those teams? So that's one way to do it.
Yeah.
Another, and that's exactly why we wrote the companion guide, the free companion guide, because it gives you an opportunity to talk about, how are we going to have clarity on our team? How are we going to connect? Which of these 4 dimensions are we good at? Which of these is the biggest challenge for us? But doing it in a safer way before
Yeah.
you're actually in the conflict.
Yeah.
And, then the other thing I would say, when you're working with teams, really be clear about, is this an interpersonal conflict or is this a team conflict? A lot of times what I see younger or newer managers, the mistake I see them make is they don't want to confront the situation between 2 people. So they bring the whole issue to the team as if it's all 8 people on the team are doing this thing,
Right.
gossiping maybe. And
Right.
everybody else is sitting there going, what are you talking about? I'm a professional. I would never do that stuff. And you lose credibility because you have broadened it instead of dealing with the acute situation that's at play.
Yeah, that's such a good tip. That's such a good tip. And on the sort of theme of generation, like, young managers and the mistakes young leaders make, I think one of the topics that we're getting lots of questions about lately is Gen Z, right? And Gen Z coming into the workplace. And I'm curious, as you did your research and as you're kind of rolling this out and talking to people, what have you noticed about the question that's come in is, what have you noticed about the different generations and conflict, the way they
Yeah,
respond to it,
the
deal with
biggest
it?
thing that I'm sorry, the biggest
Yeah,
thing
go
I've
ahead.
noticed is the medium that people use. And you
Oh,
see
interesting.
this all over TikTok, right? My boss fired me over Zoom. That, I got a note, I got a memo that I have to come into the office every day instead of being working from home. I got a memo. So the way, the thing that really I would say is, I think older generations are more comfortable picking up the phone, flying to go to have the face-to-face meeting if it's really a contentious situation. And I think then I hate talking about generations too generally, because of course humans are humans and everybody is different.
Yeah.
And I remember being really, really ticked off when somebody, I was in HR and somebody was talking about Gen X and I wasn't that Gen Xer, right?
Yeah. Right.
But with all that pre-apology said, I
Yeah.
think there is a more of a, and I see this with my own children. I've got a millennial and I've got a Gen Z, and they are more likely to text, and even if it's a difficult situation. I mean, I had my little one had his boyfriend break up with him over, a message, like a message, right? So
Mhm.
the higher the emotion, the higher the intensity, the greater the bandwidth. So you think if the most emotional conversations, if you can be in the room, be in the room. If you can't be in the room, turn on your video. If you don't have a video, pick up the phone call. But I think that's what we're avoiding. And there's real risk in that, because you see the words, we all interpret the words differently. You lose the facial expression, you lose
100%.
all of that human contact. And now you're feeling like you're dealing with a bot as opposed to dealing with a human being.
It is, and it's interesting because I watched my daughter had in university, has roommates, had a conflict situation with roommates, and they were resolving it, air quotes, through text, but then voice memos. So they weren't talking to each other, but they were sending each other voice memos back and forth. So and on the one hand, I thought kind of genius, because you get your whole thought out and you're not being interrupted and you can say what you want to say, but there's no engagement and dialogue in that. And ultimately, my daughter sat down and had a face-to-face discussion with a couple, because she knew she had to rebuild the trust with them. But it was a very interesting, it wouldn't have been the way I would have gone about doing it. So it's very interesting to see sort of the techniques that get used to deal with
Yeah, and
conflict.
it's so one way. Like, so I often work with one of my CEO clients over text, because we're both always on airplanes or we're asynchronous. But what I find is, like, you get those dots going, and while he's sending these dots, I'm already thinking about what he has said for the
100%.
thing. But so I've already in my mind formulated what I think I'm going to suggest. But then what comes after the dots surprised me, and then I have to go back. And that would never happen in a voice conversation, right?
No, never. All right, Karen, I can't believe it. We're coming up on the top of the hour. So before I let you go and we all kind of jump off to our next thing, after all this research that you've done in conflict, is there anything, any sort of parting words of advice, anything that you would share with us that you didn't know before you went in, that you know now, that you'd leave us with?
The most important thing that I would encourage anyone listening is to have the conversation. What I see again and again, people will have the conversation, they will use some of these techniques, they'll focus on the right dimension, and then I say, so how do you feel? Relieved. I feel relieved. And that is what I want for your listeners. Whether you use our phrases, your phrases, that doesn't matter. Just have the conversation.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Karin, so much. Everybody, this is the book. We will, of course, be sending out the links. Claudia's already dropped the resource link in the chat, so go and grab that now. And what we'll do is make sure that when we send out our recap next week, you will get a link to order Karin's book if you haven't already ordered it. I highly recommend this one, guys. It's just jammed. It's jammed with phrases. So this is one that you want to work on with your team. You can bring the conversation into your team and do it. But Karin, thank you again so much for being with us. Great to have you, and appreciate you fitting us into what I know is a very hectic day for you. So great.
Absolutely my pleasure. Thanks so much for the conversation.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so next up for everybody, October 17th, guess what? You're going to be with some of the roundtable team. I'm going to have a special guest. I've just got to figure out who, but we're going to talk about how to avoid career pitfalls. There are certain behaviors, beliefs, and biases that can get in your way without you even knowing it. So we're going to do that October 17th, 9 to 10. Hope to see you there. And I will now turn it over to Claudia to take us home.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Karin, for this amazing conversation. There's something that you said that really resonated with me, and it's the fact that when you say yes to something, you say no to something else, right? So it's important to like communicate your priorities and your implications so that the conflict is like less heavy. So that's something that really resonated with me. So wrapping things up, we have the roundtable for leaders open enrollment coming up for those who want to take their leadership journey to the next level. And we have only one seat left. So we only run it twice a year. This upcoming cohort is directed to senior manager and director level professionals. If you're interested or know someone who may be a great fit for this, don't hesitate and contact our lead coach, Ashley Michael, or visit our website to learn more. I'm sharing the link right now. If you want to start your own peer group, Glein's second book, The Grassroots of Leadership Revolution, will be your ally for sure. You'll find a quick start guide and a DIY support material. So pick up your copy and reach out to us so that we can get you started. And last but not least, if you happen to be in Atlanta in October 7th, Glenn will be speaking at the ATT conference with Anika Joseph from CAA group about how to unleash collective impact. You can check this and many other upcoming events on our website. I'm sharing the link as well. And of course, please stay in touch with us. We will be sending some follow-up emails with a recap for this webinar and its key takeaways. And we would love to hear back from you. And that's it for today, everybody. Thank you so much for being here with us today, and we hope to see you again on our next session.
Thanks, everyone.